Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. I'm Bob Nickman. Glad you're listening in. My guest today is a gentleman by the name of Steve Pulley, and Steve did something pretty great. He bicycled across the country from San Diego to Charleston, South Carolina to promote recovery and tell his story of overcoming opioid addiction. And then he attended graduate school right after that trip. So it's an amazing journey from somebody who couldn't really function in academics at all for a long time, who completed graduate school. He's going to tell that story, and he's going to tell about the Collegiate Recovery Program that helped him and has been a big cause for him to get those going at different places, and the program he started in Charleston, South Carolina. So let's listen in. This is Steve Pulley. You're new in Santa Monica, right?
I am. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Hailing from originally South Carolina, is that what you told me?
From Charleston, yep.
Charleston, South Carolina, which I've never been to. I've been to North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Spartanburg,
that's actually South Carolina.
Oh, that is South Carolina.
Yep.
So I have been to South Carolina.
Yep.
I've been to Inman. Do you know those areas?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Also South Carolina.
Yeah,
yeah.
Nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so kind of the South.
Yeah.
I mean, very
definitely.
much so
yeah.
the South.
Yeah, I would say those areas are more rural South Carolina, and then Charleston's a little bit more metropolitan, I guess.
And that's where you grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you partied until you couldn't party anymore.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. So I indulged.
Yeah, you indulged, and the wheels came off like it does for so many people, and you got sober, and then did this journey on a bicycle from all accounts. Tell us, what happened in terms of, what made you want to do this and what it was for and how it transpired and what it looked like, because it's a pretty fascinating story, I think.
Yeah, well, I guess backing up, when I was 20, I had to leave Charleston, and that's where I found recovery. That was March 23rd, 2008. And I had the experience of going back to college sober at the age of 21 after completing a sober living. And I was very fortunate to find a new program that had started up that served college students, and that what's called a Collegiate Recovery Program. Essentially, it's an institutionally sanctioned program that gave students, between at that time there was about 30 to 40 students participating, a place to go on a college campus that, for lack of better words, is non-conducive to sobriety.
It's sure. Oh gosh, that's where I went nuts. As soon as I got to college, it was an accident waiting to happen. Mm-hmm. So colleges are there? And what college was this again?
So this is Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia. It's about an hour outside of Savannah, about 3 hours from Charleston.
Okay.
And so I stayed in that community following a long-term sober living and completed all of my undergraduate, and I was accepted back to school in graduate school in Charleston. And so I was early accepted actually to the Medical University of South Carolina, where my only really frame of reference was the inpatient psychiatric unit as a student. And so I had a little bit of time in between, a semester in between, and I wanted to do something with that time. And I thought about traveling, thought about going to Europe, thought about doing, a lot of different things. And I read a book about somebody in the 70s that did a bicycle trip around the world. It was a couple, actually. Ironically, the lady that did it was killed when she returned back to California 2 weeks after she completed the 2-year trip.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. She was training for Ironman. I think it was on the Pacific Coast Highway. So I'm riding pretty carefully on that these days.
Yes. There's been quite a few accidents on the Pacific Coast Highway, both bicycles and cars. So if you're going to do that trip, pay attention.
Yeah, just got health insurance. I'm up to date and I'm paying attention. So, but for me, that it was an interesting memoir that was published after her death, and it was really remarkable to do that in the 70s. This was before GPS on your phone and all the other kind of modern technologies that frankly make traveling today so much more accessible and safe. But it inspired me, and I realized, okay, I probably don't have the time in 4 months to do something like that. But what can I do? And the trip across the U.S. Was something that interested me, and so I looked into the routes and what I could do and what I could do to make an impact. And then around that time, Philip Seymour Hoffman passed away, and there was a lot of press out about the opioid epidemic, and it really just told one side of the story, which was, the death statistics and just a lot of flashy imagery with syringes. And, I just was only catching one side of that narrative that was pretty grim and hopeless, where I personally had overcome an opioid addiction and was in recovery from it. And at that point, coming on 6 years, and knew so many others that had done the same, but that story was not being told, and
not quite as glamorous for the media to do that, and it's really important. So.
Right, and I think that has something to do with it, and I also think the shame and stigma behind addiction perhaps held some people back from sharing that story, and myself included at that time, and really, it was just kind of a culmination of events where the program that I went through, the Collegiate Recovery Program at Georgia Southern, was in need of a fundraiser. They had an annual fundraiser that was a haunted house that was actually pretty substantial at the time, but it had been shut down due to a slip and fall type situation. And so they were brainstorming on some things to do, and this idea came to me after I graduated. And really, what ended up happening for me was when I was applying to grad school, I had some challenges because I had to explain 5 undergraduate institutions that I had attended, 4 that had medical withdrawals, and a 5th one that had, a 3.8 GPA. And at that point, it was hard to say, well, it's just a lack of maturity, issue. maybe
part of it.
Yeah, and that definitely came into play. And maybe you could say that for the first 2 colleges you go to, but when you go to 5,
what are these gaps in your record?
Exactly. So. So I really needed some advocating. I needed somebody to say, this is what I've been up to, and substantiate it. What was helpful to me was clinical providers that had overseen me during my treatment, of course, that are credentialed, and then a director from the Center for Addiction Recovery at the College of Public Health at Georgia Southern. So it was to have that validation of my recovery, and that, hey, this student is not a liability, he's actually an asset to your institution, and here's what he's done, was really helpful. So I was really grateful. I think I ended up having a personal record for the medical university for having 35 letters of recommendation. And so, I'd had a couple of arrests as well. And so, I had to do some explaining, and I was glad to have had that support. And so, to kind of reciprocate that, I decided that I would do this trip and benefit and raise funds and awareness for the effectiveness of the Collegiate Recovery Program that I've been through, and also, an attempt to reduce the stigma associated with addiction.
Now, was this a medical school you were admitted to?
So that's where I was accepted to. That's where I was heading to. And so that's how I set up the journey. It was from San Diego to Charleston, where I would be actually starting as a student 2 days later after the trip had ended. And so what ended up happening was, with the help of the Georgia Southern program that I went through and a coordinator there, we set up 27 different facilities for me to share my story at, essentially. And those were everything from sober living to treatment centers to emerging collegiate recovery programs, and a juvenile detention center in Alabama that was pretty interesting. And so it was just kind of a surreal thing, and really happened pretty quickly, and I caught some momentum and attention from that, and was able to share my story in a positive way.
So when you would go to these places, was there media covering these things, or was it just you talking to these people?
Yeah, I mean, I respected, depending on where I was at. There's a couple of times where there was media for certain programs that were more just kind of local state advocacy programs, but when it came to like a 12-step recovery or a treatment center, I was
just you and
just me and the residents there, and I was really fortunate to get let into some pretty nice places and then some pretty gnarly places too that got me a chance to get in front of probably several thousand people on the trip. So
that's amazing. Did you go by yourself?
So I actually had somebody, they called a support vehicle, and he was there for about half the trip. And then once I got through Austin, we parted ways, and it was kind of the home stretch from that point. And yeah, it was awesome. People hosted us. There's a organization called warmshowers.org, and it hosts people that are bicycle touring. And so
I didn't know that. That's right. Oh,
yeah,
great name.
The first place that we stayed at, the guy that hosted me and his wife and his kids, he was a pastor, but he was also 10 years sober. And so he told me his story, and he had a pretty intense one that was filled with, I think crystal meth was his drug of choice, and he had been incarcerated for a period, and he had found a different pathway to sobriety than I did, but we connected, and it just reinforced really like, this is the right place, right time to be doing this. And I had a lot of instances where I would meet people along the way, because it just serves as a pretty good talking point. If you have a bicycle with a bunch of bags on it, where are you going?
Sure.
It comes up, and why are you doing it? And so, a lot of people, I realized once I was being vulnerable and telling my story, would reciprocate with another personal story that either they had been affected by personally, or within their family of having issues with addiction, substance abuse.
Touches every family in some way, whether it's that particular generation or a previous one or the next one. It's in almost every family in some way. From what I've found, the addiction doesn't really care who it affects. It doesn't matter. It's almost like somebody took a handful of addiction dust and threw it into the wind, and it lands where it lands.
Yeah, for me, it's amazing how close to home really almost everyone I talked to could relate. And a lot, like I said, a lot of times if it wasn't their immediate family, it's a friend, it's somebody else. So
did you have addiction in your family?
So not directly, not really directly in my immediate family, but in my extended family of a few cousins and an uncle that are in recovery, actually. So
that's nice to know. I'm really fascinated with these collegiate programs, because I've been reading a little bit about that. Are there whole colleges now that are like sober colleges, or colleges have their own programs? Because there's more of that now probably than when you did that. I mean, I was, first time I heard it was only like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, so that the program that I went through, and that was 10 years ago when I started. At the time there was like 158 programs out there in different capacities on different universities throughout the U.S. And I'm not up to date with how many colleges and universities offer it now, but it's a needed resource, and it's kind of tough. It was actually what ended up happening, that the story of doing the bike ride and all that is great, but the best thing to happen from it was that it caught attention from a local federal judge, actually, that was an alumni of the College of Charleston, and she came to me and said, we need one of these programs in South Carolina, because there wasn't one at the time. And so we worked together, and for a process that lasts about 2 years, while I was attending at the neighboring institution, helped start the program at the College of Charleston, which I just went back in December, and they just celebrated their first year. They have a director. I helped them raise close to $500,000 and allocate grants and private donations, and hopefully that program housed in the College of Charleston will be there forever. So that's
fantastic. How does it work? Like when you went to yours, is it separate living, separate residence? Is it how do they coordinate all that? It seems like it would, like you say, college is really a lot of temptation to party, and how many people were in it. That just seems really interesting to me, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that go, well, I'd like to go to college, but I'm really worried. I've been kind of messing up in high school, and what's going to happen? And I'm sure parents are going, what am I going to do with this kid? It's a little scary for some people, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, it really is. And kind of looking at some of the statistics, about half the people entering treatment are between 18 and 25, and a large demographic of that are entering treatment are coming from college-educated backgrounds. And, it can be, leave families a little trepidatious about entering onto that campus and environment. And you're absolutely right. And so really about a third of these programs that offer the housing component, and they're all a little bit different, to be honest. I can really only speak to the program that I went to,
sure,
and the program that I helped start in Charleston, but neither of them actually offer currently a housing situation. In Statesboro, there were so many sober livings and so many people reemerging that that program was engineered as a safe place on a campus, but didn't really have a feel of a treatment center. A lot of people had already been through treatment, and it very much is not that. It's more of a director-led, peer-to-peer focused initiative where we had a safe space on the campus where we could have meetings, we could have coffee, we could meet there. The space that they have now at Georgia Southern has evolved, and it's 24 hours access. Computers are in there, and even during times of exams and stuff like that, you go into a library, any college library on a campus, I'm pretty confident you'll see people selling and swapping Adderall and pills for to help their performance in school. And so even the library can be an unsafe place.
My daughter's in college. She tells me what goes on there. She's not part of that, but she's like, you would not believe. Well, I actually would believe, but she goes, it's pretty amazing. I had a friend of mine tell me when he was into Adderall, he said, I wrote a book when I was on Adderall. He goes, and I wrote it between the lines of another book. I go, what was it about? He goes, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's, for me, like what happened was I had really close to 5 years, because I had to do prerequisites for graduate school with that support. And then I entered onto a campus that, for all intents and purposes was a medical university with 7 colleges and people that were definitely driven and intelligent. And I was expecting the drugs and alcohol on that campus to not be present at all, or in moderation, and that's not what I found. And
okay, that's what I would have thought.
And so, what was pretty unplanned for me is the way that I emerged onto that campus, and my story was visible and public, and at times overwhelming. I was able to consult professional credentialed therapists and psychiatrists when I would get these inquiries from families and people at the medical university. Is also the largest employer in Charleston too. So it's a teaching hospital, and I would get all kinds of people kind of reaching out to me at certain points after my story was public, and it was in their kind of news forum, and it was in the paper, and in certain cases I was able to refer people to find professional help. In certain cases I was able to sit down and talk and share my story, and I found a few other students on the campus, which was nice. But in my class there was just me and one other guy that was Mormon that didn't drink, and the events that were set up, like kind of following our anatomy and cadaver class, was probably one of the most rigorous courses you take initially, and they'd have what's called a post-gross gross anatomy event after every exam, and it really was at a bar, and it was students binge drinking, and they had done an event annually. It was an art walk in the art district of Charleston, And I think it was my class. I can't confirm completely. I actually didn't attend. Where wine was served and people overindulged and some art was ruined. I think like a vase got knocked over, and it was just like, I found myself in a position at that point, working on 7, 8 years in recovery, and pretty isolated. There was definitely my kind of saving grace was putting the effort into starting the program that was really about a mile away down the street at the College of Charleston, which is a liberal arts school of maybe 13,000, and putting that resource in play and realizing how valuable what that did for me, and like when I didn't have it, just kind of how isolating it can be sometimes. And that hadn't been my experience really. Like where I went and got sober, there was multiple sober livings. There was 100+ young people in recovery living in that small community. And then when I went back to school, I was surrounded by it. And then when I went back home to Charleston, I realized, I am different, and this isn't the norm. And my kind of level of how I kind of tolerate and how I view and how I can be helpful. Was something that I evaluate at that point.
Did you finish school, or because you're out here now?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2017, and upon graduation, I ended up moving up to New York City, pretty unplanned. I had a cousin who had been going through some issues with her son. They're really both of her sons, teenage sons now, and we had formed a relationship over it. She's actually kind of a second cousin. And because my story, again, was put out there 5 years previous for the bike ride, and we had started a dialogue, and I was able to, try to be helpful and start a relationship with her son, and wrote him when he was kind of in the treatment center. And we became close, and ended up going up to visit her, and realized that I didn't want to go back to South Carolina.
Okay.
That I was just kind of ready to check something else out. And so I was pretty fortunate. I talked with her. She said, you can stay here for a bit. And I did basically like a cold message, I guess, whatever you want to call it, on LinkedIn to a PT clinic up there. Physical therapy is what I studied. And the CEO got back to me and said, hey, I'll take a meeting with you. And it was kind of interesting because, if you Google search my name, the bicycle story would come back. And so one of the articles was like, I think it was former heroin addict cycles home or something like that.
Yeah, a little
it was like
salacious.
Yeah. Junkie rides a bike. I mean, and I was at the time, a little upset about that, because I tried to choose my language and refer to myself as being in long-term recovery. And I told the writer of the paper, I was fine with using heroin because it's so prevalent in the news and still is today in terms of, the opioid epidemic. But so yeah, that comes up. And so, I've been able and found myself in a couple of interviews where, especially with physical therapy, that I feel like I can pivot on that story, and I've been so fortunate that I probably got more recognition than I deserved. I mean, the medical university had named me the humanitarian of the year, and this is like, my friends have like kind of ripping on me from it. You've got
you
got like MD, PhD candidates that are doing eye surgeries in Laos, and then you've got this recovering drug addict from Charleston that helped start a program for college kids. But it was the foundation, or really the private scholarship award, was set up. We found out that the individual, one of their family members, was a practitioner for addiction medicine, and definitely found some merit, and realized that Charleston is pretty underserved with resources, which I would say today is still true. But I've been able to turn it into an asset, and it's not a liability. And I did that on this interview, and essentially, challenged the CEO of this pretty large group of physical therapy that we needed to do more to address chronic pain issues, and it's just how it kind of relates in with the overprescription of opioid medication and how there's different modalities, physical therapy being one of them, to manage chronic pain, which really encompasses the largest demographic in terms of low back pain of disability in the U.S.
That isn't even talked about that much. This whole idea of chronic pain. When I kind of move through the world, and sometimes I'll encounter somebody who's super grumpy or very difficult, and I wonder sometimes, is this somebody who's in chronic pain? Obviously, they're in emotional pain because they're not being very nice, but sometimes that physical pain manifests in, I know when I don't feel well, I'm not pleasant to be around a lot of the time. But it seems like it's a big thing. Like, and then of course the easy way is here's some pills.
It kind of amazed me too, even going through, the medical university, and they were pretty big on interprofessionalism. So I'd spent a lot of time interacting with PAs, physician assistants, and the medical students, and was pretty transparent, like I said, with my story and my experience there, and but how many people, even medical health professionals, are naive to some of the implications that that people who, like myself, can no longer safely use narcotics, and it's my responsibility to be transparent and to initiate that history, definitely. But I found myself in other situations where the practitioner that I'm interacting with isn't educated on what that means, that I'm in recovery, and certainly I really do try to stay in my own lane, and I've been in situations as a physical therapist where I'm interacting with a client that's post-surgical that is prescribed pain medication, and there definitely is a time and a place for that. However, there are times where I wonder, like, is this appropriate, and what else could be suggested, and I think it's tough, even kind of looking at physical therapy and trying to get people to buy in. It really is a process, kind of like recovery, where you have to do the work for it to be effective, and you can come and see it, and have rehabilitation, physical or with substance abuse. But if you're not doing the work, you're not going to see the results. And really being self-educated and having a plan and being accountable to someone. There's some parallels there. And so it was interesting, that I met this guy that he really was enthused by it, and the way that it happened. And he had never really interviewed. He was the CEO of this PT group, and he just said, "Hey, whatever office you want, you can work there." And so kind of on a whim, I just moved to New York City, and then, it's still, for me, it's just kind of just being so unplanned and so kind of spontaneous, really. I realized I needed another way to supplement my income. And so I got exposed to a person that runs a company that essentially offers recovery coaching. And so I started doing that. And I started working with a client there on the weekends, and I had my physical therapy job Monday through Friday, and just started working 7 days a week up in New York, and got a host of different experiences and plugged in with my fellowship, and just a whole new world opened up for me up there, and that was about 2 years ago. So,
and then you just arrived in Los Angeles not that long ago.
Yeah, so I'm out here, and ended up actually like in the Ojai area, and I'm continuing to work with doing recovery coaching, and a lot of my clientele have dual diagnosis, and I can offer kind of my background when it comes to recovery, but also offer my background when it comes to physical health and wellness with my degrees in physical therapy and exercise physiology, and I'm also a certified emergency medical technician. So
you do it all.
Yeah. So for me, it's like it's a good way to blend my passion for exercise and for recovery together, and it's been incredible to be a part of people's lives and see the change that takes place. And it truly is what I'm doing now, is, which I wasn't finding in a lot of kind of physical therapy venues, when I was in class and when I did my rotations, and, I found that one-on-one and how high quality of care that can be. And, I think that the higher staff to client ratio in any kind of operation, you tend to get a higher quality. And so what I'm doing now is essentially one-on-one with somebody and helping them grow and develop and find what they're passionate about, and in a way that works for them. And so it's interesting, because, I ended up, reluctantly in a variety of treatment centers, and I was fortunate enough to be offered a variety, really. So, but when I wasn't ready to hear the message, I was, part of the mess, and and I gravitated towards people that were sick, and unfortunately, I believe that I entered into treatment and I came out sicker, and that was a personal choice that I made. But my exposure, even from a young age, from my first treatment, I wasn't coming out with like a recovery network. I was coming out kind of a little bit more savvy in my addiction and criminal activities, and so that's what's pretty unique about what I do, is that what I'm being exposed to when I exposed to somebody I work with is a little bit more secure in that way. So,
do you feel that you can tell pretty quickly whether somebody's really ready to want to make a change, or do you see like success coming with a little bit more time, where somebody may be reluctant at first, but then you're able to?
I believe that there's definitely a time continuum on it, and I think that a lot of people come in to recovery reluctantly. I've seen people come in through the court system, particularly, and seen that kind of accountability and having some type of motivation external rather than the internal motivation of wanting initially to change. Yeah. There's really not a one size fits all, or kind of one way of identifying when someone's ready or not. Yeah. And I believe that it does. It's a process, and that can change. From my own experience, there were days where 51% of me wanted to be sober, and the other 49% wanted to just burn it all to the ground and leave and do what I had done before. And luckily, I surrounded myself and was what I, looking back, in a quality treatment program that ensured, the safety really of the house by purging out people that were destructive, and not just saying, hey, this is a secure rent. But if we got a clean house, we got a clean house. And that's kind of identifying trends and kind of looking at other resources. I found myself in a interesting position back in South Carolina, where my story became public. As a result, people were wanting to kind of wine and dine me with it, obviously without the wine, but to tell me their treatment program, because I was kind of a walking billboard in a way of what recovery was, and people, like I said, were kind of inquiring with me, and I was able to refer them a lot of times to where I had been, just inadvertently, because I was public about my treatment and where I got sober in Georgia. And then that place kind of changed ownership, and found myself in an interesting position where I was like, hey, I don't want that responsibility, because I actually don't know. I'm not up to date on what that facility has to offer. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at. That's what I've noticed, even coming out here to Los Angeles. There's such a high density of treatment, which is great. And in some cases, maybe not so much. So,
well, it's a whole spectrum of quality,
mm-hmm.
To almost none.
Mm-hmm.
It varies. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in it, so there's some unscrupulous people too. So
mm-hmm.
I would say that people need to pay attention to what exactly they're getting involved in. There's some financial gain to be had, and if that's what the main purpose is, then maybe steer clear of those kind of places.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the opioid epidemic now? Is it increased? Has it decreased? Certainly more awareness.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be something that's Is it more in urban, rural? I don't study this stuff, but I'm sure you're a little bit more aware because I mean you hear about it, but where are we?
I think that the dialogue has started. I would even say from 5 years ago, the perception of what it is to be in recovery or to go into treatment, I could say that it's shifted into a more well-received, socially acceptable thing to talk about. And I think that's also because so many people continue to be affected by it. There's more of a conversation and more resources are being developed on a national scale. But, and again, I'm not a statistician that's up to date, but I believe that the numbers still kind of stand in terms of it's still the largest accidental cause of death. So, and so there's still a lot of work to do, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, I actually knew somebody who passed away in December from that. A very established kind of citizen type person, not somebody you would consider a quote, druggie, but he was addicted to opiates.
Yeah, I can probably, I know over 20 people that have passed away.
Yeah, it's shocking because you just don't know which day it's going to be too much or how the body's going to react.
Unfortunately, that's kind of one of the more common narratives is somebody with a period of sobriety has elapsed and they go to use and, their tolerance is down and unfortunately that's it. And that's happened to a couple of really close friends of mine, and then it's happened to just a host of people that I'd met along the journey. And and again, so that's kind of, it's so easy to sit there and talk about that. But on the flip side, I can start just kind of naming so many different like positive stories of friends that I know that are attorneys, that are physicians, that run their own companies, that are living productive lives, that give back to other people, that also did heroin and also did hard drugs and also had severe addictions that they've arrested by following a program of recovery that's been effective, and so those stories again are
I like those more.
Yeah.
Those are the good ones.
Right. Yeah.
I think that for those people it's 100% cure rate. If you're one of the people that gets it, that's 100%. So I prefer to look at it that way than only so many people percentage wise.
Right. Yeah. And it's tough. Like, I had looked into that when we were trying to think about funding sources. It is tough with the collegiate recovery programs that it comes down to funding and creating a line of faculty at a state-run institution is just a whole political gamut that I really had no idea what I was getting into until I was there. And, when it comes to, especially like interacting with academia and where the research is, there's not a lot out there for long-term abstinence-based recovery literature. There's some, and I think Dr. Kitty Harris out of Texas Tech has been a leader in that. But, a lot of these studies involve usually a medicated-assisted treatment model, which, again, is a pretty big contention and not debate, but discussion that's being had. I think there was a recent article in the New York Times, comparing, medical-assisted treatment model versus abstinence-based treatment model. And frankly, like I can see where both can be effective.
Yeah,
and I think it depends on. I can see where it's individualized, and I do think that's kind of a danger that I've found is having people that are maybe in 12-step based program that's been effective for them insert their opinions on somebody else, where I've been privy and every kind of client with the work that I do is supervised and overseen by an MD psychiatrist and a psychotherapist. And I've had people approach and kind of give their opinion on maybe a client or somebody I know that's going through something that maybe is on a medication that they're prescribed to, and they have a dual diagnosis, and that's a very real thing. And I think that's a whole nother conversation in terms of resources allocated just to mental health and what's out there for that. I think there's even less resources available to people with mental health illness, and that's been something that it's been eye-opening for me for the past 2 years, is seeing people that struggle with both and what that requires. And there's instances for sure, that's up to a physician's discretion at that point, and what's comfortable, what's going to work for, a patient that struggles with both of those. So.
Yeah, I'm basically on the side of what works for the person. If there's a level of rigidity, that can be a big problem.
Yeah, I agree.
And who's to say? So what's next? What's the big goals here for what you're doing or what you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, I guess I've kind of landed here in Los Angeles, and it's the winter time, and it's
it's like 60 today.
Yeah, I think hopefully it's gonna get up to 70 by next week, and it's definitely a place that's so just saturated with recovery, and I've been here really just a few weeks, and am just kind of overwhelmed with how many people that I've been able to plug into, and where the recovery is out here, and in a lot of ways, there's nothing like it, and so for me. There's definitely a couple of things that hold my attention and hold my interest right now, and it's kind of interesting. You'd asked me to be on this podcast, and then this organization, Facing Addiction. I actually did something with them yesterday.
Oh, great!
Potentially might help them with the PSA and kind of come, full circle with doing some of the advocating, aligning myself with some of the nonprofit efforts, and really, I plan on continuing doing what I'm doing in terms of just kind of offering. Recovery coaching and health and wellness, kind of full comprehensive plans with people, and there's such an awareness of that here, and it's just such so conducive to that an active, healthy lifestyle that I may stay put for a bit.
Fantastic. You seem like you like to move around, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Just take the gifts all over the country.
Yeah, it really is a gift of recovery, and all these things that I would never have anticipated is that, I have options today, which is wasn't the case before, and it was, that was such a stumbling block for me, I think, early coming in. And I think initially it was, where am I going to find my people, and where am I going to, how am I going to have fun, and my life, is going to be pigeonholed, or it's going to be really small if I stop drinking and using because I'm 20, and how I couldn't really fathom it until I got to a point where I really just had hit such a bottom so low that I had no choice, but to either do that or to die, and I was given the gift of kind of hanging on just a little bit more and a little bit more, and my story evolved pretty slowly. I'd say I see some people come into the rooms without needing treatment, and they get sober. Some people go into church and it works for them, and some people just put down drugs and alcohol after it becomes consequential and stay away from it. And for me, I really needed quality support, and so I think one day I'd like to develop a more comprehensive program that offers that quality support, but also couples it with fun recreational activities to get buy-in, and that's what I needed, and that kind of held my attention when I was younger. Is how can I have fun in recovery, and it's definitely afforded me now a lifestyle where that I get to do all these things, and I've been able to really wrap up school as far as I'm concerned, and I've got options, so it's all just kind of gifts from recovery. My whole life has just kind of come full circle back to it right now, where it's it's awesome. So I think there's not a better place for me to be in the whole world than where I am sitting here right now.
We are glad you're here.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, Steve.
Yeah, likewise.
And thanks for doing the podcast. That's Steve Pulley, everybody. All right, big thanks to Steve Pulley for doing that interview, and thank you folks for listening. Appreciate it, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.